Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be responding to Many a True Nerd's video, Why Fallout 4 is Better Than You Think. I shall only be responding to the parts where I have something to say, whether agreeing or disagreeing, and thus I shall link the full video in the description just in case you want to see it or make sure that I am representing his arguments accurately. Let's begin.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John, this is Many a True Nerd. Welcome to Fallout 4 is Better Than You Think, which I think it is. And that itself is something of a miracle. You see, to my mind, Fallout 4 is a deceptively intricate game, filled with systems that don't look like they should work together. In fact, I'm gonna argue that in terms of mechanics, Fallout 4 might be the most dense game in the whole franchise. There's a lot here that's easy to overlook. It's a game that takes a bit of time to understand, so that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna dive deeper into Fallout 4 than I've ever done before, and I hope that by the end, I might have sparked a renewed appreciation for how elegant some parts of this game are. So, let's begin at the beginning.
So one of the common objections you hear very often when doing a response to a video like this is, isn't all this just his opinion? Isn't all of it subjective? Well, first of all, even if it is his opinion, he's clearly taking an objective stance. Fallout 4 is a game that has quality to it, and quality is something that can be objectively measured. And second of all, when his video is titled, Fallout 4 is Better Than You Think, he is making an argument, not just presenting his subjective opinions. If I was to say, for example, Fallout 4 is worse than you think, I would want to list as objective and factual as bunch of arguments as I possibly could. Point to things that you yourself could play and experience to show, oh yeah, it really isn't as good as I previously thought. This is what he's doing, but the opposite. With that in mind, even if it is all his opinions, he's clearly stating a bunch of things that are able to be disputed and argued against.
When you see the common criticism of Fallout 3 that the shooting is clunky, there's a decent chance you're hearing from this group, because if your frame of reference is the shooters of 2007 or 2008, then yes, Fallout 3 would feel a bit clunky. By 2015, of course, it would have been much worse, and Fallout 3's shooting mechanics would have seemed hopelessly out of date. So, if you want Fallout 4 to succeed, you're gonna need better, smoother, more accessible gunplay. But hang on, as I discussed when I was arguing that Fallout 3 is better than you think, part of the reason that shooting is a bit clunky in Fallout 3 is by design. You're playing as a character who's brand new to the world, and level 2, they shouldn't be able to nail a mole rat in the eye from 100 meters. It's literally built into the game that you have to invest skill points to boost accuracy, lower spread, and reduce weapon sway. You're not an amazing shot until your character is.
The argument that the shooting is clunky because you're playing as a character who's new to shooting doesn't make much sense. You receive a BB gun at the age of 10 in the vault, and when you're forced to leave, you're presumably an adult, or if nothing else, well into your teens. Does it not strike you as odd that in all the time your character has apparently been there, they've never improved? Or perhaps you could roleplay as one who didn't take much of an interest in shooting. But what if you want to roleplay as a character who enjoyed shooting? Maybe your character grew up to be quite the gun nut. And then there's the fact that no matter how many points you put into small or big guns, the way you hold your weapon doesn't improve at all. You're still firing from the hip. Even in New Vegas, where your character might have a one skill stat in anything related to shooting, your character is still smart enough to use iron sights. This is not Bethesda being masterminds at crafting role-playing and integrating gameplay with story. This is them realizing, oh shit, how do we take this engine made for swords and bows and arrows and turn it into something that can use guns, and giving up before they were able to truly finalize that. Hence New Vegas needing to introduce iron sights.
As a result of that, if you make the shooting immediately accessible, you've undermined the entire foundation of Fallout being an RPG, that what you can do depends on your character's ability as well as the player's skill.
However, it is possible to put as many skill points as you can early on in the game into small or big guns to have the edge up on that. Something that is unfortunately not available in Fallout 4 due to the removal of skills, but we shall get to that when we get to that.
Which brings us to the second camp, the long-standing fans of Fallout, or RPGs of Interplay, or RPGs of the 90s in general, who have exactly the opposite complaint. When you hear the common talking point that Fallout 3 was a dumbed-down shooter experience that wasn't a proper Fallout game, that may well be somebody from this camp talking. And what they want is a proper RPG experience, which is traditionally characterised by your abilities being entirely defined by the character you're playing as. So, basically, who thinks it's a good idea for Fallout 4 to be an immediately accessible modern shooter where player skill translates into an immediate gameplay advantage? And who thinks the exact opposite, that shooting should have a much smaller part of the game to create a more diverse RPG experience where ability is a function of long-term character building decisions?
It's worth pointing out that these are not mutually exclusive, and he argues as much in this video, but I want to point out the exact kind of RPG that New Vegas was, as well as Fallout 1 and 2, because that's something that he seems to ignore when arguing that Fallout 4 does have RPG elements. Fallout New Vegas 1 and 2 are very open-ended RPGs where your character is as blank of a slate as the developers are able to manage when starting out, and you're able to fill in the gaps. What's your character's personality? What's your character's backstory? How does your character go about solving problems? Because in New Vegas, there's multiple ways of solving problems. Oftentimes in missions, there's skill checks for barter or speech, where you might be able to use economic incentive or just your awe-inspiring words to correct a problem rather than having to just shoot something in the face over and over until it stops moving. That has been all but completely removed in Fallout 4, where missions are so linearly structured that there's only one way you can complete them. I've used this comparison in my Fallout 4 Let's Play, as well as I think my Fallout New Vegas one, but I shall use it here now as well. Let us cross-compare the two walking MacGuffins that drive the plot of these respective games, Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 4. Benny and Kellogg. How are you able to handle Benny in Fallout New Vegas? Well, as soon as you enter the Tops Casino, you're stopped by the chairman there who asks you to hand over all your weapons, because in New Vegas, once you go in a casino, those are confiscated. Probably to keep people from shooting the place up after a bad hand of cards. But you can use a speech check to convince him to let you keep him, and you can explain to him what Benny did and why you need to kill him. Or, if you have a high enough sneak skill, you can sneak in like a small silenced pistol in order to shoot Benny with. So you can immediately confront him guns a-blazing if you so desire. Now, if you're a female courier with a Black Widow perk, you have the option of seducing him and sleeping with him, in which case you can either take the platinum chip and let him go free, or you can kill him in his sleep. But otherwise, he's likely to get away and run over to Cottonwood Cove if none of those options are available. I mean, suppose you can break out your fists and start punching him to death, but everyone else is armed, so that's probably not the best course of action. So he runs over to Cottonwood Cove and he's trapped in Kaiser's tent. And depending on if you've sided with Kaiser for a while, if you're a mail courier, you can fight him in the arena. You can have him crucified. You can start punching him then and there in the tent. You can kill him if you're ever storming Kaiser's tent. Or you can untie him and let him try to run free, but I'll just piss everyone off and make them shoot you and him. He's not going to make it. Or you can untie him and give him a stealth boy, in which case he will be able to go free, but it will still piss the Legion off and they'll still attack you. So that's multiple different ways of handling the exact same guy. A very important guy in the story. He's the one who basically starts your adventure, but a guy nonetheless. Now let's cross-compare that with Kellogg. You confront him in the underground systems of this old world military base or something of another. And what are you able to do? Well, you can talk to him, but you can't really do anything with that. He's not going to divulge any actual information. You can't convince him to betray the Institute in favor of joining your side. You can't do anything. It always ends in you having to shoot him until he stops moving. You can shoot him with a shotgun, you can shoot him with a pistol, you can shoot him with a laser rifle, you can shoot him with a fat man. But at the end of the day, it's just an armed conflict between you, Kellogg, and these robots he has accompanying him for whatever reason. And I say for whatever reason because it doesn't seem like he's working in the best interest of the Institute at that moment, and yet these Institute synths are still helping him out. But this really exemplifies the difference between New Vegas and Fallout 4 in terms of being an RPG. New Vegas has multiple different ways of handling a quest, and their quests tend to have multiple different steps rather than the standard go to place and kill thing, or go to place and grab thing, or sometimes they really shake it up, go to place and kill thing, and then grab the thing. Where quests in New Vegas are based usually around two opposing factions filled with characters in of themselves with their own desires and backstories, quests in Fallout 4 are based on handling either mindless animals, be it actual mutated beasts or feral ghouls, or just a bunch of raiders, be it actual raiders, super mutants, gunners, whatever the hell those old world Prohibition gangster LARPers are called, or the Children of Adam. You just go to place and there's something there with no backstory, no history, no nothing trying to kill you, and you need to kill them first, and then you save the day! Hooray! That's not an interesting RPG, especially compared to the ones that Obsidian and Black Isle Studio are able to craft. Fallout 4 had a 5-year development time, whereas New Vegas had 18 months, something that Matin in his own video points out. And yet, in those 5 years, it seems like they've learned nothing about how to make interesting quests and implement the sort of in-depth RPG mechanics that New Vegas had to offer.
Then Skyrim launches in 2011 and becomes one of the most successful games of all time, so does that mean we should take notes from that? And just when you think things can't get any worse, those bastards over at Obsidian manage, in 18 months, to make a Fallout game that just happens to be one of the best video games ever created.
While I do agree, and New Vegas is one of my favorite games of all time, I somewhat suspect if this is, a sort of way to deflect any possible irritativeness, I suppose you can say, that viewers of this video might have where he's dunking on New Vegas and its mechanics in favor of Fallout 4, which people have criticized him for going after New Vegas in his Fallout 3 is better than you think video, so it seems like he's trying to cover his ass here, and that's also not entirely true because New Vegas is indeed one of his favorite games. Like, he has multiple playthroughs of New Vegas to a point where people point out that for all he shat on New Vegas in his Fallout 3 video, he's able to do all these different Let's Plays and role-playing scenarios for New Vegas, but he hardly touches Fallout 3. And indeed, he also hardly touches Fallout 4. Is there a Bethesda conference coming up I should know about? Are you gunning for those sweet, sweet canvas bags there, Matin?
Now a load of those new Fallout 3 players have had the chance to experience a really good Fallout game with strong RPG elements, and many of them really liked what they saw. And now things are even more impossible, because previously, the old Fallout fans were in a tiny minority, but now, thanks to New Vegas, there's literally millions of people who have played a Fallout game that's a lot more RPG-ish, and you can't ignore that many people, so now Fallout 4 also has to somehow embrace what people loved in New Vegas, even though New Vegas didn't even exist at the start of Fallout 4's development.
So, outside of the fact that there's multiple factions to side with, well, there's 4, how did it embrace New Vegas's stuff? Like, all of the quests are handled in basically one way with like maybe 1, 2, or 3 exceptions. When it comes to the ending, 3 out of the 4 endings are literally the exact same clip, with the 4th ending being different because, of course, the Institute isn't going to nuke itself. But, like, you remember with Mass Effect 3, where at the end of this RPG epic adventure, the ending was a clip but it's tinted red, a clip but it's tinted blue, and the same clip but it's tinted green? That's basically the level of Fallout 4's endings. Far cry from the varied and diverse endings that you can get in New Vegas depending on how you handle the different missions and what your impact on the world was. There's no longer any skill checks, with the only thing coming into play being charisma, and usually for just getting more caps from doing a mission, not actually changing how the mission is done or what you need to do. And there's like one single instance where your intelligence stat comes into play, but every other time, doing the missions is going to be the same no matter what your special stat is, because it's not an open-ended RPG, it's a fucking shooter.
Because unlike previous Fallout games, where loot tended to be fairly generic and distributed at random, now you need to consider what's going to yield it. Need gold or silver? Try residential areas and look for jewellery. Need ceramic? Look for restaurants and kitchens. As you play more, you start to get a feel for what's going to be where, and thus whether, with your current needs, it's worth taking the time to loot a nearby diner, or science lab, or electrical store. And suddenly, it struck me. The game has taught me not just to act like a scavenger, but to think like one. The game mechanics have nudged me into role-playing as a Fallout prospector, and I think that's kind of genius. Of course, all of this would be meaningless if the junk didn't do anything. So fortunately, the opposite is true. Junk isn't just important, it's part of the core of the game. Specifically the, by this point, well-acknowledged core gameplay loop of explore, loot, craft.
It is indeed true that there is more to loot because of how they handle junk, but I don't see it being all that different from in New Vegas, where if you see a new building, you might be incentivized to go in because there could be health items like stim packs or water, there could be ammunition, there could be caps, there could be new weapons, there could be interesting lore. There's a bunch of stuff to scavenge or prospect in New Vegas as well, just not as much as in Fallout 4, because Fallout 4 also has the crafting mechanic. However, one of the problems with the crafting mechanics is that higher level crafting abilities are locked behind different levels of perks, and the different levels of perks are locked behind specific levels your character needs to be in before you can obtain them, which is something I will get into later.
But I do want to step back and look at the wider picture here. In particular, how Fallout 4 is for the most part unique in the Fallout franchise for even having an identifiable core gameplay loop at all. You see, in any big open game, you're going to have two different tiers of goal at the same time. First, you have a long-term goal. Find the water chip, find Dad, find Benny, find Sean. But these goals are often vague and far off, so generally the game is going to give you smaller, more local, more achievable goals. In Fallout, this is often done through subquests. Stop the Rad Scorpions, Power of the Atom, Ghost Town Gunfight, stuff like that. Local missions that can be resolved in a fairly short period of time. Now this worked fine in Fallout 1 and 2 as every location in the game features quests and the space between them is represented by a map screen. The system however started to run into a bit of difficulty in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, as now the space between major towns wasn't just an abstraction, it was a real space you were travelling through, which thus had to be populated with stuff. This led to many small locations, camps, houses, abandoned farms, which the game flags to you and you can explore, but there's a risk that you could walk away from them empty-handed. And that's a bit of a disaster design-wise, as that teaches the player to not bother exploring in future. Exploration should always yield something. And thus we come to Fallout 4. The junk economy is a very elegant answer to this problem.
When I was playing New Vegas, I never had the notion of, oh, I shouldn't explore this place because there's probably nothing in it, because as I've mentioned before, there is stuff to find. There's money, there's weightless items that you can sell, there's weapons, armor, skill books, magazines, and tidbits of lore to figure out what was this place in relation to everything else before the war, or sometimes how is it being run after the war. And on top of that, the side quests that we were doing were actually pretty interesting for the reasons I've mentioned before, the various ways that you can normally complete them. So there was a goal in mind when moving from point A to point B, and typically in Fallout New Vegas, the places you're sent to for these side quests aren't usually very far away from where the quest is initiated. Now obviously there's some quests that you go all over the map, but there's also plenty of them where you're just in this general localized area. So if you do go around exploring more, it actually makes handling the wider area quests easier, because you can just fast travel to those places or close to them. However, you can also just not do those quests at all.
And I'd argue that the modular weapon crafting system of Fallout 4 is a huge step forward for the franchise, building on some of the best ideas in New Vegas. You see, for a long time Fallout had a problem with linear weapon progression. Basically this means that certain weapons are simply objectively superior to others, meaning you have no reason not to trade up from one to the next as they become available. The problem this creates is it makes playthroughs very similar. You know that certain weaker guns will be traded out as early as possible. And at the other extreme, you know that the moment you get your hands on certain weapons, there will never be any reason to stop using them. From the Turbo Plasma Rifle in Fallout 1, to the Pulse Rifle in Fallout 2, or Vengeance and Lincoln's Repeater in Fallout 3, these are objectively superior weapons to anything else you're going to find.
I would agree that the crafting system in Fallout 4 is pretty good for weapons, though with the objection that because so many of the weapons have the exact same components, there's not really any uniqueness or variety to them. Though I suppose you can also make the argument that if you decide to specialize in a single weapon, like a shotgun or rifle, then it's good to have as many crafting abilities available to you for that weapon if that's what you want to play as, and not be restricted because, oh, I can't attach this component to it, whereas I can attach it to a different weapon. However, the argument that you're going to find these better guns and just stick to them, I wonder what's wrong with that. because these unique variants of weapons, such as the Q-35 matter modulator to the plasma rifle, or Annabelle to the stock rocket launcher, or the Pew Pew to the standard laser pistol, all of these you need to either kill an enemy, such as an Annabelle, or go through a dungeon, which often requires you to have high-level lockpicking or science or some other skill, such as the Q-35, or to complete a quest, such as with the Pew Pew. You've gone through and completed something in order to earn these rewards, so why should you not be able or be entitled to just use these objectively better variants? You're still free to use the regular versions. New Vegas isn't telling you you're not allowed to, but there is a reason why you would use these variants opposed to the stock versions. Meanwhile, the same thing can be said with Fallout 4, and even more so because Fallout 4 removed weapon damage and durability. No matter how many times you use the same overpowered gun you crafted or found a legendary version of, which I shall get into later, you can keep using it and never put it down because there's no risk of it breaking after prolonged usage.
And you know what? I'm just going to mention this here. I love what Fallout 4 did with the energy weapons. Rather than being a distinct class, as in every previous Fallout game, leading to that slightly awkward mid-game moment when you realise all the best weapons from now on are going to be energy weapons, which you haven't been investing in, because you haven't really seen any energy weapons so far. So now you have to spend a few boring levels just piling points into energy weapons to make them usable. Not anymore. In Fallout 4, rifles and energy rifles are deemed to be the same class in terms of perk investment.
There is a significant difference between creating a tiny controlled explosion to propel a red-hot pellet of metal into an enemy and firing what's effectively a beam of light at someone. So it makes sense that these two weapons would be different in terms of what you need to know and what skills you need to effectively use them. Now, as far as the viability for energy weapon builds go for early game play, Fallout New Vegas, at least when you decide to have a high energy weapon stat compared to any of your other weapon skill stats, you are gifted a laser pistol from Doc Mitchell as your starting gun, so you're always going to at least have one energy weapon. But this is a problem that can be solved through more balance or better balancing, rather than scrapping the distinctiveness between these two skills entirely. Or, removing skills entirely, which, again, is going to be brought up later.
But of course there's another side to the discussion about weapons too, and prepare yourselves because I'm about to say a controversial thing. I love the legendary system. I think it adds so much to the game in so many ways. Firstly, it gets rid of the old problem that once you've got a strong enough gun, you know you'll never find anything better, because anytime you could come across an instigating variant of your favourite weapon, or an explosive shotgun, or an automatic that applies extra flat damage per bullet. Once I found a plasma-infused minigun. That was a good day. You can do as much crafting as you want, but you'll never be absolutely certain this is now the only gun you'll ever need. A better weapon or piece of armour might be waiting just around the corner.
He goes on to praise the legendary system, of which I'm sort of alright with and sort of not. One of the problems is that getting them requires you to kill a legendary enemy, but there's nothing to actually say why they're famous in the Wasteland. Why are they legendary other than a star by their name and a bigger health bar? Why was that Radroach so famous to everyone around it? Why was that Raider something everyone knows about? And consequently, why is this leather leg piece so damn important? Why is this pipe pistol something that belongs in a museum? In previous Fallout games, there were special named variants of stock weapons, as I've mentioned before, and these often had backstories. The Q35 matter modulator was supposed to be a prototype for a new and improved plasma rifle that was going to be used in the Great War. The Pew Pew was a weapon of choice for a notorious man who went around murdering people in hopes of collecting star bottle caps from them to unlock the secrets to some strange, mysterious treasure that everyone in the wasteland had their own views of what it was. They're better than the standard stuff, but you have to earn them. Meanwhile, with the legendary weapons in Fallout 4, they're often hit and miss. Sometimes they can actually be a direct improvement from what you have as the stock variants, but other times they could just be small changes that mean nothing in average gameplay. However, just because you might find a better weapon eventually doesn't mean that you're going to forego using your plasma-infused minigun for a regular minigun, or stop using the laser rifle that literally sets enemies on fire for extra damage for the standard version that does not have that upgrade. It's still the same problem, and again made worse because there's no damage done to the weapons by frequent use.
That doesn't change the fact that these mechanics are fundamentally those of a looter shooter, and not an RPG. Checkmate, burn the witch. Seriously, I've seen this one being thrown around a lot, so apparently we need to discuss a bit of gaming history here, because I think the term looter shooter gets some folks a bit upset, possibly because it has shooter in it, so that means it's further down the RPG to FPS spectrum, and thus represents a dumbing down of Fallout, but this just doesn't really stand up to any level of scrutiny. First, just a reminder, looter shooters as an entire, admittedly slightly wibbly defined subgenre, were a variant on loot-heavy RPGs. Diablo is often mentioned as one of the important inspirations, with Diablo 2 lead David Brevik running an early online test with Hellgate London, though the first big success was most likely Borderlands, coming out in October 2009, which very conveniently started selling very well indeed at just the same time as development was starting and big decisions were being made on Fallout 4. The looter shooter has always been an offshoot of RPGs, and often features plenty of character build and upgrade options to build your character in the direction you want, which is a pretty core part of, an RPG. And even by the standards of looter shooters, Fallout 4 really skews back towards RPGs and away from the direction plenty of other looter shooters developed. Fallout 4 doesn't put twitch shooter gameplay at the centre of the action. There are no classes, instead sticking with a complex character build and upgrade system. There's no online focus, and your effectiveness with a weapon and how you utilise it is much more a function of your character build and crafting choices than the inherent numbers of the gun itself.
When it comes to people arguing that Fallout 4 isn't an RPG, I don't think I've ever come across anyone pointing to the fact that plays like a looter shooter as a reason. But even if that were the case, there's would be a reason for that. It's that even if looter shooters are an offshoot of RPGs, Fallout was a very different sort of RPG than a looter shooter. The RPG mechanics of a looter shooter are based on looting and shooting. All the different wonderful, wacky, whimsical ways you can blow a man's head off. Whereas Fallout, the emphasis was on player choice with how they're able to go about solving these quests. Where yes, there is the option to blow someone's head off, or shove dynamite down their pants, or snipe them from afar, or any number of destructive, violent ways, but there was also through compromise, through diplomacy, through commerce, through using your knowledge in a subject to handle things. In Fallout 1, you could shoot the master until he stops, well, not exactly moving, but not doing that annoying staying alive thing that seems to piss everyone off. Or you can have a high speech skill and use your research into the super mutants to point out that his plan fundamentally will not work, in which case the issue is resolved without you having to fire a single bullet. That's pretty swell. That's the kind of RPG mechanics people want in their Fallout. Not just, oh look, there's more variants of guns you can shoot. The fact that he doesn't even mention how quests are completed, except to talk about the variations or differences between the main 4 factions, and the story structure in general, kind of shows to me that either he's not aware of this, or he is aware and is deliberately ignoring it in favor of talking about something that is clearly not the chief complaint of Fallout players.
I don't actually think Fallout 4 is a looter shooter at all.
So in other words, all of that in that history lesson was a massive fucking waste of time. Grand.
Let's discuss character building. You know, the strange thing for me isn't that Fallout 4 made some big changes to character building, is that it took so long to happen. In terms of how special works, I think Fallout 4 might be my favourite Fallout game of all, and that's largely down to a change that looks minor on paper, but has a huge impact. The reduction of your starting special points from 40 down to 28. This was massively overdue, mainly as the old system, 40 special points divided between 7 primary statistics, meant that you could be perfectly competent in 6 stats, and then a world-class genius with a special of 10 in a stat of your choice. Maybe even more curiously, you could be literally as good as it was possible to be in 2 different primary stats, and still have a respectable enough score of 4 in the other 5.
The reason you had significantly more special stats was because they tend to influence a single element of your character. Strength meant you could hold more shit. Charisma gave you a boost in skills like speech. Endurance meant you could take more hits. There would be skill checks and those special stats would play into certain perks, but the majority of your character crafting came from skills. Because Fallout 4 doesn't have skills, they had to nerf the amount of special points you can get, since that's a sum total of your initial character build.
It feels very generous to me. To my mind, it just seems reasonable that if you want to be as intelligent, or strong, or agile as it's physically possible for a human to be, then go ahead and do that, but surely there should be a compromise somewhere.
Except there is a compromise. If you put all of your special points in 1 or 2 areas, you're not going to be able to have as high of a special stat in another area. Maybe your perception takes a hit, or your strength, or your endurance, because you're running and gunning, pardon the humorous expression, for a speech and science and sneak-based character. It's also worth pointing out that 4 in Fallout is about average or maybe even a little below average, so having a super high strength or intelligence, but being 4 in perception or endurance, means you're just about average when it comes to those qualities. You can see alright as much as a normal human being can, and yeah, you can take a punch or two, but you're not someone walking around with practically ESP abilities and able to survive the blast of an atomic bomb right next to your feet.
Special balance is another issue that the franchise has struggled with in various ways. While there's no special stat that's especially useless in old Fallout, there is one that's typically noted as very strong. If you look over Fallout 1 and 2 character build guides, you'll see a pattern emerging: very high agility. After all, it doesn't matter whether you're planning to use guns or melee, whether you want to stand and fight or run away. In a world where all of your in-combat actions and movements are controlled by action points, you're gonna want plenty of them. This was a very minor thing though. The real trouble started in Fallout 3. You see, with weapon strength requirements removed, and a new carry weight formula that was fairly generous to low strength characters, anybody who wasn't going for melee didn't need strength.
Really? What about all the people going around picking up as many weapons and armor pieces as they can to sell later? Or just grabbing as much stuff as they want because that's how they want to play the game? Being able to carry more shit, the thing that the strength stat influences, is a pretty nice feature, is it not? Would you rather just keep on being over-encumbered and having to manage your inventory, or would you rather be able to pick up that gun and not have to worry about that. Well, put some points into strength if you want that outcome.
And perception, in a move so baffling I'm still convinced it must be some kind of mistake, had no impact on your chance to hit. And
Perception's big impact, other than influencing certain skills, was allowing you to detect enemies on your compass from farther away. That would allow you to better get the drop on them and be better able to avoid them if need be, because the further away you can detect them, the less of a chance they have to detect you. At no point did the game provide the illusion of perception making your chance to hit higher, so why are you bringing this up?
instead just modified your compass text, leading to an odd situation where you might find yourself taking perception you absolutely don't want or need just to access the excellent perception perks, sniper and better criticals. Now, Fallout New Vegas did restore weapon strength requirements, and then took away Fallout 3's blended charisma speech system, making charisma basically useless and giving birth to the Charisma 1 Speech 100 monstrosity. Perception was still completely useless as well. And then came Fallout 4 with a rebalanced special system and 28 points to invest in it. And that's brilliant, because that means your starting point is now an average of 4 points per primary stat. If you want to be a genius with 10 intelligence, your other stats are now on average 3 each. Want to be the world's strongest and smartest man? Great! Enjoy having 2s and 1s in your other 5 stats. This has always made me think a lot harder about every single special point. In Fallout 3 or New Vegas, bumping up intelligence straight to 9 is just something I do without thinking at the start of each game.
Really? Because when I do it, I want to have a really smart character for role-playing purposes. And also because plenty of dialogue options during the quests involve needing to be high intelligence. Whereas in Fallout 4, there's really no reason to bump up intelligence because all it influences is your XP amount. And I don't really see that much of a difference in how much XP you get based on an average intelligence and a high intelligence anyways. It doesn't come into play anywhere else, and it doesn't matter from a storytelling perspective because whether you're the smartest man in the wasteland or a literal fucking retard, you're still the leader of the Institute. Having a high intelligence means nothing to these super scientists who, have no regard for anything but blind progress, even at the expense of human life and well-being.
As if being a near genius is some non-event. In Fallout 4, I'll rarely go higher than 7, because the cost and compromise seems too high elsewhere. Specifically, Fallout 4's entire special system reminds me of the classic Fallout trait system. As a reminder, traits are almost always double-edged swords. They allow you to give yourself a particular advantage, but always at a cost.
Though traits have been removed in the 3D Fallout games, they have largely been supplemented by perks. Whereas yes, some of them are direct upgrades, many of them are also side grades which have their own pros and cons to them. The Good-Natured perk, for example, gives you a bonus in non-violent means of handling situations, speech, science, that sort of stuff. But it comes at a cost of your ability to shoot weapons well. It takes away skill points from small guns, big guns, explosives, and energy weapons, and that sort of stuff. It's a side grade. Do you want to be the silver tongue guy who talks his way out of confrontation? Well, you're going to have to take a hit in your ability to shoot people until they stop moving. And there's also a variant of that perk that boosts your ability to kill people, but reduces your ability to handle things peacefully.
The Thing. We have to talk about The Thing. The thing that always comes up when anyone discusses Fallout 4's character build system. And I'm going to say something now that makes me wonder whether I actually enjoy the pitchforking, but it's something that needs to be said. Skill points are not, and never have been, a good way of representing and controlling your aptitude in key skills. They were long overdue for a rework.
I don't know if anyone told him this yet, But reworking something isn't literally scrapping the whole thing and making an objectively inferior replacement to it.
Fallout 1's mechanics were closely modelled on the GURPS system, which was first created in 1986, and we were still using something close to it in 2010's New Vegas. Okay, do you know part of the reason why tabletop games represent skills as numbers? It's because when a game is happening entirely on a table, the easiest way to generate a random result is a dice that generates a number, and thus the easiest way to check how well your character did is to also have your skill represented as a number, easily accessible on a character sheet so you can see whether your stat is higher or lower than the dice roll. But most RPGs today do not actually have visible dice rolls, they're going on in the background. And even more than that, we don't see the calculation, we just have numbers and a result.
No matter how much they try to hide it in a video game, it's still going to be numbers. If you have a charisma of 10 in Fallout 4, you're going to be able to pass every charisma check no matter what, because you have that shiny number next to your stat. If you can hack master terminals, it's because you have a level 4 hacking perk, another number. They didn't get rid of numbers, they made it dumber and less interesting because there's no way to make specialized build since all the perks are locked behind levels. Hey, more numbers!
Say in New Vegas, I put 6 skill points into barter, repair, and guns. How much better are the prices I get? How much more accurate am I with a gun? How much more can I repair my gear? I don't know, because the game doesn't say how it's working it out. The moment the mechanic is a secret back-end thing, then skills as a number have no meaning. It's madness. You can invest in skills and have no way of knowing what that did without checking the wiki. But here's the crucial bit. It actively, specifically doesn't work in a video game. Let me give you a really simple example. If you've ever watched a speedrun of New Vegas, you'll notice...
Let's stop right there. This is something that can be fixed by having the game show an increased or decreased percentage as you make the choice. An example being if you put 6 points into barter, the game will say things cost 4% less. And if you put 10, the game says 7% less, and so on. You don't need to dumb down the mechanics or take away player freedom just because you don't have absolute information about how much caps you're going to save when buying a stim pack. It's also kind of funny because skills in New Vegas are used in skill checks during the dialogue system, and that has absolute numbers. In Fallout 3, it's a percentage. You have a 70% chance of convincing this guy to help you out, or a 30% chance that he's going to tell you to go fuck yourself. In New Vegas, it's even more concrete. You have 40 out of 35 points needed to get this guy helping you out, or you might only have 20 out of 35 points needed, in which case he's going to tell you to go fuck yourself. In Fallout 4, you have yellow chance of getting help, orange chance of getting help, or red chance of getting help. What the fuck does any of that mean? Does 7 charisma let me pass orange? Does it sometimes let me pass red? Or is passing that hard locked to 9 charisma, and then the other time I'm told to go fuck myself? There's no information about how much changing charisma affects the very fucking thing that charisma is supposed to affect. And then you're pointing to speedrunners? Buddy, speedrunners do not play the game like everyone else plays a game. They will do anything and everything they can to shave off a few seconds, whether or not the developers intended that to be the case. And that's even from the most broad, loosest sense of an open-ended RPG, like New Vegas. It's just not a good comparison because these people are not the average gamer. They don't have the same experience that you and I would have when playing a game for the first time or the 50th time.
The runner immediately builds a very extreme character. A common one is Strength 1 to help fund Endurance 10 and Charisma 10. they'll rush to speech 100 by level 6 and use that to talk down Linnaeus at the end of the game. Generally, we call this min-maxing, the process of building a hyper-specialised character who is therefore hyper-competent at the exact thing the player needs them to do.
Yes, New Vegas allows you to go all in on a specific skill. You can go all in on speech every time you level up, like going all in on black when playing roulette. But again, this is speedrunners. These are people who have figured out how to fly across a Mojave like a fucking airplane in order to discover locations quickly and early. They are not indicative of how you actually play the game. So let's say you decide to go all in on speech during your New Vegas playthrough. How are you going to heal yourself with such low medicine? How are you going to unlock locks or dig into terminals without having any skill points or very minimal skill points in those areas? And forget about fighting, using explosives, shooting, sneaking, anything like that. All you have is the ability to talk well. Congratulations, you've made the game harder for yourself. It's actually not all that different in that regard from the special system you praise so much in Fallout 4, where if let's say you fast-track strength, you're going to be deficient in every other area. But here's the real kicker, big boy. That's still fucking numbers.
Now, in a tabletop game, this wouldn't fly. There are many articles by game masters discussing how to deal with power gamers who are trying to min-max, but the general gist of it seems to be, if the game master spots this as happening, they can adjust the world to compensate, ideally in a fun way, like having the player's strength draw unwanted attention, or potentially just having a quiet word with the player to make sure everyone's having a fun and fair time.
Which, as you point out later in your video, New Vegas isn't able to do because New Vegas isn't controlled by a human being but a rigid AI. So they can only do so much before the game comes out to account for this. But I do wonder, why is that honestly so bad that you're able to min-max? Isn't that just another way to play the game? You can try go for a varied character, or maybe quite skilled in 3 or 4 areas, or you can decide, you know what, I'm going to make a challenge run for myself where all I have is a high speech skill and maybe something tangentially related, but I'm going to be utterly deficient in these other areas of gameplay. You know, something like an RPG, I guess.
That people playing PC RPGs in the 90s went in fully understanding and expecting the game to feature hidden dice rolls and probability. A bigger general video game audience in 2008 and 2010 would be much less familiar with this idea, and might find it confusing and frustrating that they were failing skill checks without knowing why, or even that they were happening. And I can speak from experience here, because the very first time I played Fallout 3, which was also my first Fallout game, I got hugely frustrated that I was failing pickpocket attempts in Megaton, which led to everyone shooting me. Now, as far as I was concerned, I was sneaking, I was behind the guy, so obviously, to me at the time, it felt like the game had either bugged out or I was just being screwed over unfairly. I had no idea there was a stealing dice roll happening in the background that was a function of my stealth skill. Luckily, I gave Fallout 3 another go a few weeks later and had a great time with it.
And that's on you, because here's a galaxy brain take. If you have only a few, little, maybe 5, 10, 15 points into sneak, you're not going to be very sneaky. But if you have like 30, 35, and 40 points into sneak, you're going to be a lot more sneaky, and people are going to be less likely to notice you rummaging through their back pockets. Now, I'm really not sure why this is so difficult, because various skill checks do have a hard number attached to them. There's a specific number of explosive skills you need in order to detonate or defuse a bomb. Speech. The higher your speech skill, the better the percentage chance that you'll be able to convince someone to do something rather than being told to go fuck yourself. Having a specific number of points in science allows you to hack different levels of terminals, and the same thing for lockpick. At the end of the day, it's just the intuitive, bigger number is better. Do you want to be better in this area as opposed to this area? Then put the skill point numbers into that area so you'll be even better at it than you were before.
Mostly though, Fallout 3 and New Vegas even more so utilise skill thresholds. 25 lockpick to open this door, 50 science to hack this terminal, and in New Vegas, 60 speech to persuade this person. Now, have you spotted the issue yet? Let's say you have lockpick 25 and come across your first average locked door, so you decide to invest in lockpick. You're playing New Vegas and you have a pretty good intelligence stat, so you're getting plenty of skill points. You wait, earn XP, level up, and put all 14 skill points into lockpick. Now you have 39 lockpick, which means nothing. You still can't open average locks. Your character is, in real terms, identical to what they were before.
How's it any different in Fallout 4, where a higher tier lockpicking perk is locked behind a certain level? It's worse there because New Vegas you're able to fast track lockpicking, level up 2 or 3 times and you'll be at level 50, and well on your way to 75, while if you level up 2 or 3 times in Fallout 4, fuck you, you still can't unlock these specific locks, and there's no way to change that outside of console commands or mods. But what is it? Is it easily exploited or imbalanced, or does it have literally no effect at all? It can't be both, many a true nerd. Either it's too easy to min-max up certain levels, or the system leaves you putting all your skill points in a single area and getting literally nothing. If Fallout 4 allowed you to do the same thing as 3 in New Vegas, where you can focus and fast track a specific area, even if it's just perks, this would be significantly different. It would be different, but as it stands right now, fuck you, you're not this arbitrary level the devs decide you need to be before you can heal yourself more, hack harder terminals, craft certain objects, and so on and so forth. I'll take finagling with numbers and maybe not being able to get the next tier in a specific level and have to wait until the next one, and being able to min-max any day of the week over Fallout 4's pathetic perk system, where no matter what you do, you're never going to be able to unlock this save because you haven't grinded enough by shooting enough fucking rad roaches. And because of Fallout 4's shitty system, a lot of your characters ends up being the same. You're of course going to want to be able to lockpick locks and hack into terminals, but you can only do that during certain levels, so you can't boost your science skill up like in New Vegas as fast as possible and maybe wait a little bit for lockpicking. You're going to have the same unlocked perks at the same levels across all of your playthroughs no matter what. It's dull, repetitive, it's railroading, it takes away player freedom, it's just shit, and it takes up slots for what could be more interesting perks, because they need you to be able to heal yourself better, they need you to be able to hack into terminals, they need you to be able to snake well, they need you to be able to shoot well, and those all used to be tied to skills, but now they take up perk slots. So there's less room for new and interesting ones, different gameplay balances, those pseudo trait perks I talked about earlier. It's shit.
And the worst thing of all, skill points can completely run counter to roleplay. I know I use Charisma 1 Speech 100 as a joke, but it really is a problem. It's absolute proof that completely detaching your intrinsic natural aptitudes, represented by special, from your actual practical day-to-day abilities, represented by skills, creates a complete mess. It leaves us with a scenario where a character with perception of 1 who has never picked a lock in his life can be the world's greatest lockpick master just because that's where you put your skill points.
But while perception does influence lockpicking when you increase it, perception isn't lockpicking. The lockpicking skill is lockpicking. He can be a sort of Mr. Magoo type character who's blind as fuck to everything around him, but somehow is able to pick apart locks. This of course could be handled by better balancing of special stats and skills, not by removing skills entirely and just presenting a shittier system in its place.
Like I'm losing my mind is, when it was revealed that Fallout 4 was removing skill points, people were furious. There was anger that Bethesda was dropping a 30-year-old tabletop mechanic well known to be easily exploited, imbalanced, and capable of yielding nonsense power characters. Well, hopefully, I can change a few minds today.
The only thing that has changed because of your video is me realizing just how much better skills are, because now I've had arguments against their implementation to weigh them off of.
Because in Fallout 4, everything's been folded into the perk system, where every perk corresponds to a certain special threshold. And I think this is good, because perks are great. When I was playing Fallout 1 and 2 for the first time, the levels where you got a perk, which is only every third level, they were the best and most exciting levels for me. Because, fine, what I'm about to say is pure opinion, but I imagine most people would agree with me. Making a number go up a bit, thereby providing a small invisible percentage increase to one of my skill rolls, is not as exciting and cool as scrolling through a perk list and picking which brand new ability I want to immediately have access to.
Except that's exactly what a lot of the perks do, because many of the perks are just replacements for what was once skill points.
And I think Black Isle themselves would agree with that, because when the time came to make New Vegas, they increased the perk rate to every second level. They also got rid of various Fallout 3 perks that simply boosted skill points, and replaced them with more perks that provided unique benefits that generic skills can't provide.
So in other words, New Vegas not only did it better than Fallout 3, but somehow it also did it better in Fallout 4, because again, Fallout 4's perk system is encumbered by the fact that many of the perks are just replacements for the generic skills. Fallout 4 is just Fallout 3 light in that sense. It's shittier than Fallout 3, dude.
Perks are fun. Selecting a perk is fun. And crucially, unlike our lockpick example before, you can't find yourself accidentally taking 2/3 of a perk. If you take a perk, you immediately have that benefit, meaning leveling up will always yield a positive change for your character. And on top of that, this solves a couple of our other problems. Because perks are tied to special, you can't just become a master without any form of natural aptitude.
However, perks also take away your ability to specialize in things. I can't specialize in lockpicking because higher tiers are barred off behind higher levels. If I'm at level 4 and need to be level 8 to do a next level, like I think advanced and then expert and then master lockpick, then it's going to be level 5. It's fuck you, you can't specialize in lockpicking. Level 6, it's fuck you, you can't specialize in lockpicking. Level 7, it's fuck you, you can't specialize in lockpicking. And level 8, hey, you're finally able to kind of sort of a little bit, maybe if you squint at it and pretend to specialize in lockpicking. Meanwhile, New Vegas, even if you can't reach next tier with your available skill points, you can say, hey, I got Tumblr's Today magazine shoved up my ass. I'll take a peek at that and get 10 more lockpicking skills necessary to unlock this thing. You can also use skill books that give you 2 or 3 additional points, and you can increase that yield with a perk because they have the sense to not make basic gameplay features locked behind fucking perks. Whether I have 1 perception or 10 perception makes no fucking difference to what tier of lockpicking I can have. Maybe if you were able to unlock the different tiers sooner, the higher your stat in a specific special area was, it would be a little bit different, or at least not as shitty. But as it stands, there's no specialization options. You can't roleplay as an interesting character who's skilled in a specific area because there's no possible way to be skilled in a specific area. And by a specific area, I mean a specific gameplay mechanic, one that isn't just fucking shooting.
If you want to do advanced chemistry, you're gonna need high intelligence. If you want to run a bustling town, you need decent charisma. Immediately, this makes sense. It's very intuitive, and I think it provides the best possible compromise for allowing players to rush to elite special abilities, while stopping a repeat of the level 4 skill 100 rushes of Fallout 3 and New Vegas.
How was the original system not intuitive? Bigger numbers means you're better at the thing. And why are you so fucking, ass blasted at these min-maxers? New Vegas doesn't force you to play that way. And these are all single-player games, so what the fuck does it matter if somebody else gets their kicks playing that way? They have the option to, you have the option not to. Meanwhile, Fallout 4, you have no option to fast-track a particular area of gameplay. You're far more limited, and it's just far shittier.
You see, in Fallout 4, every perk has multiple ranks, and you can always take the first rank immediately if you meet the special requirement.
And you can't take the second rank until you meet an arbitrary level count. So any possible way of fast-tracking a particular skill or ability is completely lost. And I know I harp on this a lot, but it's a major reason why Fallout 4 is so much less fun to play than Fallout New Vegas. It's just boring having to wait and grind until, oh, you're this arbitrary level, now you can unlock this save. Congratulations, go fuck yourself, Bethesda.
This system gives you more flexibility and more ability to specialise from a very early level than any other Fallout game.
Literally, utterly, completely, objectively, 100% fucking wrong. There have been multiple times in my playthrough of Fallout 4 where I've run across a terminal or a save or something or another that I wanted to unlock, but because there's no way to speed up being able to unlock those things outside of leveling up by killing enough fucking rad roaches, I'm shit out of luck. New Vegas, every level you can just dump all your points into a specific area in order to specialize in that area. You can't do it in Fallout 4, so why are you lying, dude? Why are you fucking fibbing right here, right now, in an attempt to defend this shitty game?
Announced that you could have ice cream for dinner and go to bed when you wanted, because Fallout 4 lets you have the first rank of any perk at level 2. That's a choice of 70 perks, but it's not just the choice, it's also about how it's presented to you. What you actually see is 28 out of an available 70 perks. Now that's a huge amount of choice, and represents a huge amount of significance for your special decision. If you go all in on perception, you can start shooting through walls at level 2. Cannibal at level 2? Sure. Level 2 pacification of enemies? No problem. But you're gonna have to make the special compromises elsewhere, like we already discussed. And all of this is part of a wider trend in Fallout 4 that lets you boost more specific abilities than ever before. In the entire franchise up to Fallout 4, power armor was just an elite armor type. There were no perks for it.
Actually, there was literally a perk called Power Armor Training that allowed you to wear power armor in the first place. It's not the case where you're some pre-war lawyer who can just crawl into a suit of power armor all willy-nilly. It's something you had to earn over time, because power armor was this incredibly powerful and amazing tool that gives you a direct upgrade from what you previously had available.
If you wanted to roleplay as a Brotherhood Knight, then I hope you've got a good imagination, because the game's got nothing for you.
Big fucking talk coming from someone defending Fallout 4. Hey big boy, what can you roleplay as in this game? A pre-war veteran who has a wife and a son and a loving robotic butler who's completely dedicated to him, who treats his family well and has a healthy relationship, whose great-great-great-grandfather has a fucking established history? Or maybe the same thing, but you're a pre-war female lawyer. There's nothing you can do outside of that. You're locked to this specific family, to their specific personalities, and there's no fucking way to change that. You can't roleplay as, for example, a straight-up homosexual, because at most you can be bisexual. You can't roleplay as an intelligent character, because your intelligence stat means fucking nothing in conversation. You can't roleplay as like a master thief because there's no way to actually make yourself significantly better at picking locks and sneaking than everyone else through skills. You have to wait until you're a certain level before doing that. You can't even roleplay as a fucking Brotherhood of Steel character because the first time you meet Nick Valentine, your immediate fucking ability isn't to be able to shoot him in the face and kill him. He's a essential character. You're not able to kill him. Do you know what you can do to almost every single character in New Vegas, save for a single Protectron vendor and the children? Kill them, if you so desire. Hey, don't like this particular faction? Kill the leaders immediately. The game will allow it because it's an open-ended RPG that gives player choice and agency and allows for role-playing.
Well, in Fallout 4, you can give yourself the ability to create shockwaves by jumping from height and power armor, and then eject your armor's power source as a dropped nuke grenade, which you can do while flying. You can fly over your enemies and do a fusion core bombing run. It's amazing.
Wow, congratulations. A video game made after previous installments have more features and things you can do. I'm pretty sure if Bethesda or Obsidian had more time and more knowledge when they were making Fallout 3 in New Vegas, you might have been able to do the same thing or something similar there. But as far as player choice goes, even if you have the option to fly over the heads of enemies and shit nuclear bombs, it's still less significant than being able to specialize in a specific area.
And that specialization, that uniqueness that comes from your choices, that stays with you in the late game much more than previous Fallout games, and I can prove that with numbers. So, let's consider how perks are gated in Fallout games, because that's really important to keeping characters unique. If every character can have every perk, well then, you're probably always going to pick the same few really powerful perks. Like, say, in Fallout 3, Finesse, Nerves of Steel, Sniper, Better Criticals, things like that. Except we have a problem here. You see, in Fallout 3, the highest special requirement for a perk in the entire game is 7. But John, I hear you cry, didn't you say earlier that the average starting special stat in Fallout 3 is about 6? Why yes, I did. Or, 7 with the bobbleheads. And as for skill requirements, mostly it's 40 to 60. A single perk ninja does go up to 80 though. Now, that sounds a bit more aggressive, but then you remember how easy it is to max out every skill in Fallout 3. To do that, you'd need 1,300 skill points. You start with 195, another 45 through tagging, 130 through bobbleheads. There are actually 600 available through skill books, but you're not going to get every single one of those, though you are getting 20 skill points a level from leveling up with intelligence of 10, so 400 by level 20. Then there's educated at level 4, and a whole bunch of perks do give 10 to 15 points each. It's actually surprisingly easy, in fact, to max out every skill in Fallout 3, meaning every character, no matter where you started from, can have any perk. And New Vegas is barely any more strict. A handful of special 8 requirements, 6 perks that call for 90 or above in a particular skill, but again, it's not difficult to rush skills in a world where intelligence is a giant skill point vending machine. If I've got my numbers right, you should be able to have access to literally every perk in New Vegas, and be very close to having 100 in every single skill as well, around level 38 or so.
But to do this, you need to play in a very specific way, which might bar you off from being able to do other things, like invest heavily in one area straight off the bat, and wait before leveling up your skills through different perks, and so on and so forth. But again, I ask, why is this a bad thing? So fucking what? Someone can figure out how to max out their skills and get all the perks if they are, clever enough and understand the game's mechanics enough. I mean, if New Vegas is supposed to offer players the choice in how they play, I think being a complete shitter and rolling around with an overpowered courier is just as legitimate a way to play the game as trying to hyper roleplay as a very specific and specialized sort of character.
But with Fallout 4's system, of course, elite perks are locked behind every single special 10 stat, in a world where you start with less special. Now, you can, to be clear, boost special instead of taking a perk in Fallout 4 to access more perks thereafter. But even if you did nothing but that, it would take you until level 40 just to have access to every perk by having special 10 across the board. But around level 40 is about the time a typical player seems to finish the base game. Fallout 4 is maybe the best game in the entire franchise at giving you the ability to build a character that gets to be unique from the very early game and keep unlocking perks that are only going to be available to you if you focused your special in that direction.
Unless, of course, you want to keep investing in a particular perk, since that's even more specialized, in which case you're out of luck. But my question is, if you can do the same thing in Fallout 4, then why not have the system that's less shitty, less grindy, and overall more fun? Which is clearly the New Vegas one, because my goodness, Fallout 4 is just really goddamn dull when it comes to gameplay and leveling up. And I guess this is more subjective than anything else, but I just don't have as much fun in Fallout 4 as I do in New Vegas.
And this is before we get into the hugely welcome special rebalance. First up, offer sacrifices to Zeus because perception actually impacts VAT's chance to hit again. Now there's a gameplay loop related to looting, strength just became a lot more valuable, and doubly so in survival mode where the base carry weight is stripped back even further. Without skill points, intelligence provides a much more modest XP boost, desirable but not as overpowered as the Fallout 3 generation.
At no point was intelligence super overpowered in previous games, because if you put all your points into that and neglect other special stats, then you're going to be left without, say, a high enough strength to carry as many things as you want, or perception so low that enemies start shooting at you before you even know they're there, or an endurance that turns you into a flimsy sheet of paper that a strong enough gust of wind can topple over, or any other number of different drawbacks due to having a low amount of points in a particular special stat.
How do you square that circle and build something that works for the contradictory demands of shooter and RPG fans?
Not by removing the well-loved RPG mechanics, that's for sure.
Well, to answer that, we're gonna need to discuss combat.
So by this point, one thing I notice is he hasn't even remotely touched on the story, which is one of the biggest gripes people have with Fallout 4 and its status as an RPG. Yeah, you can choose a special stat that lets you grab a perk that lets you fly in power armor and shit out nukes, but what about interacting with characters, or how you're able to complete different quests, or what your actual impact on the world is? Instead, he goes on to talk about how Bethesda improved combat, which, no shit, you already went over that fact that they improved the pew-pew shooty elements of the game. We get it, it's more fun to shoot at enemies until they stop moving. This has nothing to do with RPG mechanics, and isn't the main gripe with Fallout 4, from the RPG player perspective. I understand there's also people who complained about Fallout 3's shooting aspect, but they are clearly a minority when it comes to the dissenting opinions of Fallout 4. And if you're trying to convince people that Fallout 4 is better than you think, maybe you should cater to the people who are actually shitting on Fallout 4, because I don't see a lot of people saying, "Oh, Fallout 4 sucks because it's not fun to shoot guns." I have nothing to say about the change in bullet spread or anything like that, because Fallout isn't supposed to be a straight up fucking shooter. However, I will say that I do in fact like the addition of a critical meter for VATS, since not only does that give you a small bonus or incentive for using VATS, but also allows for a bit of additional strategy where you can save your critical shot for a difficult enemy or when you're low in health. Though I do find it funny that in this segment he actually describes how to min-max a VATS character. Thus, I shall skip this part and move on to when he's actually talking about the story and subjects closer to the gripes of myself and other Fallout fans who insist that if not outright not an RPG, Fallout 4 is an exceptionally shitty one compared to New Vegas or even Fallout 3.
So, let's step into the world and talk about the Commonwealth. It's kind of a cliche at this point, given every time Bethesda announce a new game they always say this, but you really can tell with Fallout 4 that a lot of love goes into the map and the world. And a big part of that is the biomes, which Bethesda did beautiful work with in Skyrim, and since then, it's been a consistent bright spot in their games. Even Fallout 76, for all its many flaws, had a beautiful, varied world. Frustratingly so to my mind, as it could have been an amazing stage for a traditional Fallout single-player campaign. But the more I think about it, the more I think Fallout 4 could be the crowning achievement to date. And it's down to three things to my mind. Sure, the variety is great, the East Coast beaches are beautiful, the marshes are creepy, and I love how much more water there is, rivers and lakes and the ocean, next to Fallout 3. There's so much variety here and a pleasing amount of colour, but there's plenty of variety in Skyrim too. So, as I say, these are the three things that really elevate Fallout 4.
I would agree completely. The environmental designers have shown their work and dedication, and it's a damn shame their skill wasn't being put to use in either a better game or with better writers and game directors. Though I'm a desert-phile myself, and thus New Vegas is still going to be my favorite environment, Fallout 4 does have great landscapes. I like the changes to the environment, like the radiation storms or fog that could make even the same area look completely different and provide a sort of somber scenery to the game. It's these changes that make me wish that hopefully Microsoft will tell Bethesda to remaster Fallout 3, and especially New Vegas, where they keep the same general mechanics but add in some of the improved quality of life things that Fallout 4 has to offer, as well as the better graphics and environmental design. But we will be getting to those a bit later.
But it's also noteworthy that storms can appear anywhere, as can a whole bunch of other weather conditions, which is just brilliant. Most of the time, conditions are clear and sunny. But just sometimes it'll be cloudy, other times there's a fog that actually hampers visibility. Sometimes it's just raining, and going out in the rain in survival mode causes a slightly raised chance of getting ill, which is just amazing. But most of all, anywhere, anytime, a rad storm can break out, and you either accept this is just part of living in this world and deal with the literal fallout, or you make a run for cover and wait out the storm in a building. Just consider that for a second. A dynamic weather system that might mean I choose to wait out some fog or a storm. It's just a beautiful way of making the world feel a bit more alive and potentially turning even the most gorgeous area into something a lot more sinister.
Again, I completely agree. I think these are wonderful changes to Fallout, though maybe the lore aspect of the radiation storm is a bit iffy. You can at least argue it's just relegated to the East Coast. However, these are not enough to elevate Fallout 4's as a game, because ultimately these are just small visual flares that might make areas look cooler, but looking cooler and playing better are two very different things.
New Vegas went in a more open direction with the outer New Vegas ruins, but honestly they're fairly unremarkable. You just generally run through them on the way to something more interesting.
So he's ignoring the East and North Vegas Square, both of which have their own designated societies, their own NPCs that have their own backstory and character, and have a bunch of quests within them. Alright then, so be it. But if you're going to criticize New Vegas for not having something, You have to be aware again that the game only had 18 months worth of development time, not even 2 full years, whereas Fallout 4 had 5 years at the absolute minimum.
While the actual core of Vegas, the Strip, is extremely small, made up of only a tiny handful of areas with a few casinos attached to them.
Again, shorter development time, and also based on hardware limitations of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. If you've seen concept art for New Vegas, you would see that they had a much grander idea in mind for the Strip, but unfortunately it could not be implemented. Maybe something good will happen on this shithole of a planet, and Microsoft will allow Obsidian to remake New Vegas in a time with less hardware restrictions and a better budget, and complete access to Bethesda's resources, and far more development time. And for what's worth, they own both Obsidian and Bethesda right now, but it still seems very, very unlikely. But I would say quality over quantity. Those casinos may be sparse and small and few and far in between, but they've made as much use as they can out of them. Each one of them is distinct in their theme and their visuals. They all have interesting quests, multi-layered ones with multiple different ways of completing them. And they just are significantly more interesting than another random shanty shack civilization by a bunch of squatters that you can maybe find 4 tomato plants growing in that seems to litter the non-hostile areas of Fallout 4.
But then along came Fallout 4 and Boston, which is just absolutely huge. As in, the main urban centre, from the north of Cambridge down to the south of Boston, that's a longer walk than from Vault 101 to Tenpenny Tower, but instead of desolate wasteland, it's heavily built up, with hundreds of ways through. There's no tricks like in Fallout 3, it actually feels like a city, where you can travel along back streets, stick to main roads, use the river to bypass trouble, head up to the overpass to cover some ground, even stick to the rooftops for parts of it, even more so when you have a jetpack. And I feel I should again stress that Fallout 4 has a jetpack.
I agree, the cities do look fantastic and there's a lot more traversal opportunities than in previous Fallout games. However, Bethesda had the advantage of working with better hardware, the newer generation consoles, more time, and more money. However, there's a phrase, wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle, and that applies perfectly to Fallout 4's cities, where there is this vast sprawling cityscape, but there's really nothing to do in it. A building is either going to be empty, in which case you might scrounge for caps, or it's going to be full of things you need to shoot until they stop moving. The only main civilized areas of the game with NPCs that are neutral to the big 4 factions that have quests and characters and such are Diamond City, Good Neighbor, and Bunker Hill. Though they built this entire city, they didn't develop it well, and this can be seen very perfectly with Bunker Hill, where you have these people living in these crappy little shanty shacks surrounded by a makeshift barrier where they're exposed to the filth of the land and the elements in the air, and yet surrounding them completely are a bunch of multi-story intact buildings that would likely already have beds, have some sort of plumbing that could either be used right away or repaired, and have all these general conveniences that'll make it more comfortable to live inside. And what they could have done is barricaded all of the streets leading to the area in order to regulate who comes in and out. But no, they'd rather sleep on a mattress on a hardwood floor made out of driftwood that they found rotting after 200 years, as opposed to living inside a comfortable, generally enclosed brick structure. There's banks and bookstores and college campuses and old world labs and all this stuff you can explore, and yet all you can do in them is either scavenge or shoot things that are trying to kill you. There's no real interesting quests involved with them. There's no higher utilization of them. I mean, let me pitch this idea. They still, for whatever reason, continue to use caps as currency despite people on the West Coast now printing their own fucking money. But if they're going to keep using that, why not have a building that's a bottling plant, and the people who live in that area have effectively turned it into a bank and a mint, a place where they can produce more bottle caps in order to keep the economy running steadily, but also a place for people to store their bottle caps, and all the interesting missions that could be involved in that, like maybe you're performing a heist, or maybe you're stopping a robbery, or something or another. Just be imaginative, fucking utilize these buildings, this city you've designed, rather than, oh, there's a bunch of ghouls in this one, oh, there's a bunch of mutants in that one, hey look, there's a bunch of synths in that one, I hope you like shooting, because that's really all you're gonna fucking do.
And even more than that, it's got its own mini biomes in the form of neighbourhoods. The ghoul-infested residential north around the highly radioactive Cambridge crater, the huge skyscrapers of the central financial district, and the super mutants that occupy the area, and the barricaded raider camps of the south. You can literally navigate by the style of building around you or the enemies nearby.
Are we playing the same game here? The enemy placement in Fallout 4 City is so mishmashed that you cross one street, you move from feral ghouls to super mutants, and 20 steps later you find a bunch of raiders. The enemy placement is jumbled and nonsensical half the time, given that two completely different groups are often literally right around the corner from each other. This is something I ran into multiple times during my playthroughs. But it also highlights the fact that Fallout 4 City doesn't really have much to offer other than things to kill. Diamond City, Good Neighbor, Bunker Hill. Hope you like those, because the only other thing available on the map is a bunch of shanty shacks built out of driftwood that's 200 years old and are so fucking weak that one of the 4 residents of it could fart and topple the whole thing's over. And they grow like 3 crops. Woohoo, what an amazing game. Far cry from the multitudes of settlements that existed in New Vegas, such as Good Spring, Nellis Air Force Base, Conn's Encampment, Jacobstown, East and North Vegas Square, Freeside. And those are just the non-faction associated settlements. If we bring factions into it, then Fallout 4 also has the Institute, the Pridwin, and the airport, a single rinky-dink shitty church for the railroad, and, well, I guess the Minutemen sort of have Sanctuary Hills and the fort, but that's something you have to build up yourself, so not really, no, they don't have shit. Meanwhile, Fallout New Vegas has McCarran Airport, Forlorn Hope, Cottonwood Cove, the Strip itself, or Mr. House, Camp Golf, various ranger stations. Like, it's not a huge sprawling city, but there's much more memorable locations to be found in the map of New Vegas than there is in Fallout 4, because the locations actually have some meat to them rather than meat to shoot.
It took until Fallout 4 for somebody to think, hey, what if we could go up? And bloody hell up we went.
Jesus fucking Christ, you insensitive asshole. Don't you know J.J. Abrams might be watching your video? What a fucking shitter you are, god damn. Next thing you know, you'll be talking about the third dimension as well. Way to make him feel inadequate, you dick.
So, let's talk about your opposition, and here's where I need to swing in to defend Bethesda's honour, because there's one complaint I've seen repeated over and over again, and I'm not having it because it doesn't stand up to the slightest bit of scrutiny. This one goes, Bethesda are uncreative and the enemies are boring because they reused enemies from previous Fallout games, which is true in the most technical, literal, superficial sense. We have seen things of roughly these names and designs before, but in any meaningful way, the enemies of Fallout 4 are a huge step forward, and I think they play an important role in why combat is much more enjoyable in this game.
He goes on to describe the changes made to enemies and how they're more fun to fight. For example, the super mutant suicide bomber who'll run at you and need to be either escape from or become a priority target, or how feral ghouls can have individual limbs blown off and they'll still crawl their way to you, or the ways that the robots can be damaged and how the more you damage them, the more their insides are exposed, and thus the more damage you'll do to them subsequently. And I agree, they improve the combat of the game. They cater to the Fallout 3 isn't a good shooter crowd, but not the RPG crowd, and I suspect it's the RPG crowd who are most complaining about the enemies, because when they say they're boring, it's because it's the same fucking enemies we've seen over and over and over again, whether or not they make sense. Super mutants don't make sense in the Commonwealth because they require something called a forced evolutionary virus to be created, and that's supposed to be something super top secret that only a few people have access to. And yet Fallout 4 decided, no, this pre-war college also had access to FEV, so now we can arbitrarily put super mutants into the Commonwealth. For whatever reason, they didn't just have the super mutants from other areas migrate to the Commonwealth. It's not that far from the DC ruins. They said, no, there needs to be an entirely new source for them. Or the rat scorpions. I don't know if anyone's explained it to them yet, though, but scorpions are native to the American Southwest. It makes sense they'll be seen in Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas, because those take place in California and Nevada, where scorpions are native too. It doesn't make sense they'd be in the DC ruins or in Boston, because scorpions are not naturally found there. There's multitudes of different animals that are found there that could be horrendously mutated and thus be one of the many things you have to shoot until they stop moving, but because rat scorpions are a Fallout thing, a designated Fallout trademark thing, they have to include it because being clever or interesting just isn't an option. Take note, I don't have this problem with, say, the rat roach, because cockroaches tend to be found fucking everywhere.
Okay, refresher time. It's 2008, you're playing Fallout 3. You run into your first mole rat. What does it do? Well, it's a melee enemy, so it's going to run straight at you in order to perform an attack. How do you deal with it? Well, you could cripple its legs to slow it down, or go for a headshot, which does bonus damage.
Dude, what the fuck are you doing? That's Megaton's entire food supply you're killing.
Who actually lives here? So, at the start of this video, approximately 2 weeks ago, I pointed out the impossible position the creators of Fallout 4 faced at the start of its development, and one of the many issues was that Obsidian went and made the best game ever in 2010, and that couldn't help but shape parts of Fallout 4. And the biggest way is, at the highest level, how the world of Fallout 4 is populated, because the game fully embraced a faction system, and the factions are completely at the centre of the game, vastly more so than Sean.
So Fallout New Vegas has 4 main factions: NCR, Kaiser's Legion, House, and Yes Man, which is more of a wild card faction where you're more or less supposed to be in control. Fallout 4 also has 4 main factions: the Railroad, the Institute, the Minutemen, and the Brotherhood of Steel. But Fallout New Vegas has multiple sub-factions. It has the Boomers, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Great Khans, Good Springs, the Kings, the Followers of the Apocalypse, the White Glove Society, the Chairman of the Tops Casino, the Omertas, and probably a few more that I forget because there's so many. Fallout 4 does not have sub-factions. It might have groups, that you have to shoot at until they stop moving, but those are not factions because there's no way to influence your standing with them. There's no way to influence your standing with the Raiders, or the Gunners, or the Super Mutants, or those Prohibition Gangster LARPers, or anything like that. At most, there's the Children of the Atom, which has a single shanty shack settlement in the glowing sea, but every other member of them immediately starts attacking you in the base game. So while he's not wrong that factions are a big part of Fallout 4, let us make sure to understand real fucking clear now that New Vegas not only has more factions, but I would also argue better factions. And in fact, from many objective standpoints, he also believes that New Vegas has better factions. So let's see why he's bringing it up.
The point I'm trying to get to here is, in terms of core structured Fallout quest experience, the factions are at the heart of everything, becoming more and more prominent as the game goes on. If Fallout 4 is going to work overall, the factions need to work, and apparently I just really enjoy the pitchforks because I'm about to say maybe the most controversial statement I've ever uttered. In some ways, Fallout 4's factions are superior to New Vegas. Okay, while you're all putting together a bigger bonfire, because now the first one isn't anywhere near hot enough, let me be clear. New Vegas has the better faction reputation mechanic. Its factions have much more interesting in-depth lore that rewards the player for engaging with them with rich backstory. They're populated by a better selection of more varied and compelling characters, and in general, they are much better written.
And I agree with the reasons why New Vegas's factions are better than Fallout 4, and I would also add they make a lot more sense. The Institute is very nonsensical. They have an entire division dedicated to retrieving runaway synths. This faction that has limited space and limited power finds a need to have this division so much that they dedicate some of those limited resources to it when they've already developed synths that are completely obedient to them, and there's even robots with strong AI, such as Codworth and other Mr. Handys, that don't have the same problem that their synths do. And even worse, you're literally able to copy and paste the AI of a Mr. Handy into the body of a synth, because that's the quest line, the companion quest line for Curie. The railroad don't make sense. So in a world where you still can't cross a street without being attacked by super mutants, feral ghouls, gunners, and a whole other manner of nasty things, and in a world where actual fucking slavery still exists, you have a bunch of people who dedicate their time and limited resources to rescuing robots, something that literally the entire rest of the world fears and abhors. And they're trying to make it like, oh, it's an analogy for the American slave trade, like the Underground Railroad. But it doesn't fucking work because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. It's just a fucking wacky, whimsical part of Fallout because that's all Bethesda really knows how to make.
But despite all of that, Fallout 4 has an ace up its sleeve, and to explain what that is, let me begin with a simple example. In New Vegas, when you're exploring McCarran and the Strip, you can learn a lot about the monorail system. Characters explain to you that it's a very useful strategic possession for the NCR, allowing them to move men in and out of Vegas easily and, if necessary, project strength into the Strip, effectively controlling two areas for the price of one. It's an important asset which has its own quest dedicated to it. So, what happens if you blow it up? Does the NCR's presence on the Strip reduce to represent it's now harder to get there? Do we see more NCR troops passing through Freeside? Now that's the only way in. No, none of those things happen. Miss New Vegas announces that it happened over the radio, Colonel James Shue will say it's a disaster, but nothing in the world changes.
So first of all, why would there be less NCR troopers in New Vegas after the monorail explodes, since they were all there before the monorail exploded? And second of all, this can be accounted for by the 18-month development time that Bethesda gave Obsidian to make this game. Yeah, no shit, Bethesda is going to be able to do more with 5 years and a significantly higher budget, and being the ones, in control of their own shitty, broken game engine as opposed to lending it out to a different company. So yeah, it's kind of expected that the additional game in the franchise, next one, will have features and things a previous one didn't. But that doesn't matter when these factions aren't well written, aren't interesting, don't have interesting quests. And as far as your impact on the world, that's fucking laughable because of the reasons I mentioned before with the ending of Fallout 4, where all you get is a shitty fucking monologue from your character and a little clip show, two different variants of it depending on whether or not you blow up the Institute. Meanwhile, in New Vegas, you get to hear about your long-term impact on the world around you, how it influenced locations, factions, companions, general NPC characters, and the overall state of the Mojave. Fallout 4 doesn't have shit compared to New Vegas in terms of explaining your impact or showing it.
And this happens quite a lot in New Vegas. No matter what major events occur, the Legion driven out of Nelson and Cottonwood Cove, the sacking of Camp Forlorn Hope, the death of Caesar, the assassination of President Kimball, Heck Gunderson promising to staff the Strip, the leaders of Crimson Caravan and the Silver Rush being killed in revenge attacks. The status quo always holds. The NCR patrols do the same handful of routes no matter how well or badly the war is going for them. The point I'm trying to make here is, in New Vegas, like the vast majority of games, you do big, important things that you're told are going to be hugely consequential. And yet, the world just carries on. You don't see the change represented in the world around you.
Which again, limited development time. It would be really cool if Obsidian had the time and resources, necessary to develop New Vegas in a way that you can see some visual impact. Like, if you kill a bunch of NCR soldiers in an area, the Legion will start appearing there, and I think that happens in the Helios 1 tower, but not really anywhere else. It would be really cool if the NPC distribution changed based on what you did and who you helped out. And it sometimes happens, like when you free the captive family from the area leading to Cottonwood Cove, they'll actually appear in the Followers of the Apocalypse Old Mormon Fort area. Or if you help the residents of Vault 34, they'll appear in the Aerospace Park. But overall, because they had such limited development time, and were also limited by the hardware, the 360 and PS4, that just was not possible.
And this is where Fallout 4 shines, and in particular, one of my favourite factions in the entire franchise, Fallout 4's Brotherhood of Steel.
You hear that? Someone at Bethesda just blew their load into their pants. Finally, a justification for shoving these assholes into every single goddamn thing, whether it makes sense or not.
And it's down to how they organically interact with the rest of the world. You see, at the start of the game, the Brotherhood of Steel aren't present in the Commonwealth in force, just a handful of scouts. But at the end of the first act, they arrive with the Pridwin and Vertibird, and they issue a threat that nobody should interfere in their business. They say they're here to hunt down and destroy monsters, where their definition of monster is a little bit on the broad side. They're a heavily armed, militaristic, authoritarian group that press gangs farmers into handing over their crops and basically seeks to forcefully occupy Boston and kill anybody who stands in their way. So, a few concerning things there. In general, when a faction rocks up in a game and announces that it's taking over, but don't worry, because their huge military is completely fine, but don't get in our way or we will murder you, that's a good sign they aren't to be trusted. But here's the crucial genius bit that makes me adore how this faction works. They actually follow through on all of their talk. they do actually get out into the world and start killing monsters. And not just in a handful of scripted events, you'll run into them all over the shop and you'll find yourself feeling very relieved when you hear the sound of an approaching vertibird, because they genuinely do help. Their vertibirds will lay down fire on the enemy, knights will deploy onto the ground with powerful weapons and armour, and they do a good job destroying groups of raiders, ghouls, super mutants, all the things that ordinarily would be attacking you. And this creates a really fascinating bit of storytelling, because everything they say makes them sound like the bad guys. They deny the possibility that a sentient AI could ever have the right to exist. You're asked to shake down farmers and seize any valuable technology. But they're actually helpful. The railroad doesn't have the manpower to handle patrolling and is focused exclusively on its own goals regardless, and the Minutemen are dedicated to protecting their own holdings, not general pacification of the region. The simple fact is, the Brotherhood get out and kill a lot of bad things. The lore of Fallout 4's Brotherhood is fascinating too, because it's a bold new place for the Brotherhood of Steel, but one that feels perfectly in character. This is the realisation of a dark place that we always knew the Brotherhood could go to.
The Brotherhood of Steel are a bunch of isolationist technophiles who believe that high-tech items should not be in the hands of the common people because of the dangers they pose to the rest of the world with unskilled minds using them. So let's grant the fact that the Brotherhood of Steel got over their isolationist tendencies and want to explore the world. That still doesn't excuse the fact, for example, that they literally blow up the Institute with a nuclear device. The Institute is a vast resource of countless amazing technologies beyond just the synths, and the Brotherhood of Steel traditionally would want to gather as much of that tech as possible to use it to further their own agenda. Yet in Fallout 4, they just destroy all of it, all because of a few robots that they could very well take care of by just shooting at them themselves, just as they've been doing the entire fucking time. And even if they're willing to expand outward, they're not going to be friendly to strangers who pass by. So it's kinda silly that your player character is able to rise up to the rank of a Brotherhood Knight, something that would usually take years of dedication to reach, all because one person put in a good word for him or her. It's one of the problems with Fallout 4 making your character super important in a faction, but it doesn't really feel like that. You become the de facto leader of the Minutemen, but you can't actually lead them. You become the head of the Institute, but you have no say on any of their policies, even though Sean was able to shut down a longevity experiment with cybernetics just on a fucking whim, no matter who or what had any say against that.
In brief, this means that even if you were to ignore the words coming out of every character's mouth, the gameplay will still impart a piece of the story to you. Now, you've probably heard of the opposite of this, where the story and gameplay are at odds. Like, say, you're told you're on a top secret mission, but then the alarms go off and there's a massive firefight, but it doesn't seem to matter. We call this ludonarrative dissonance. Fallout 4 features the opposite of this, ludonarrative harmony, where an impressive amount of thought has been put into crafting faction missions that inherently suit and inform you about the relevant faction. So let's examine that supposition. The first quest given by the Brotherhood after they arrive in full is Show No Mercy, where you get in a vertibird, circle a group of mutants, gunning them down with a minigun before landing and wiping out the remaining mutants inside. The mission is only complete when everything is dead. So, if you'd paid no attention to the plot up to this point, and had never played a Fallout game before, and knew nothing about the Brotherhood, what would you learn from this mission just from the gameplay? 1. The Brotherhood has access to superior technology. 2. They deal with their problems violently. 3. They are uncompromising and will, as the mission says, show no mercy. And there you go. What I was saying before about how terrifying a Brotherhood crusade could theoretically be, that's it, right there, the basics of what you need to know about the Brotherhood to understand the faction embedded in a single mission's gameplay.
This would be a great point if it wasn't the general nature of every single mission in the game, or at least close to it. Every single faction, even the Railroad, whom you try to distinguish from the Brotherhood of Steel, as using stealth more than head-on combat, mount frontal assaults and tell you to go to places and shoot things until they stop moving.
But let's step back and examine a different faction to see if this holds true elsewhere. The first mission the Railroad gives you is Tradecraft, and it is hugely different to Show No Mercy, which it should be. The Brotherhood are a huge advanced army, while the Railroad is made up of a small number of elite agents. They rely on secrecy, tactics, and intelligence. So, how does their mission go? You begin by exchanging call signs with a second agent and specifying how you'd like him to help you. You have a choice of approaches, as the other agent is both a capable sniper and an explosives expert. You then proceed to sneak into the facility through a sewer. During the mission, you can use several terminals to disable security. Your goal is to infiltrate a safe and acquire a piece of technology. In short, hugely different. And what would we learn if we ignored every word that's written or spoken? This is a group of agents. They use stealth, equipment, and other sneaky tactics to outsmart their opponents. And there we go. That's a good summary of how the Railroad really does operate. What about the Minutemen? What does Preston tell you to do? Crucially, nothing. He doesn't want you to do anything. Instead, he wants you to go to small farms and ask them what needs doing, which most of the time will be dealing with a small local problem, a nearby pest or raider. Do that for them, and their farm becomes allied, and you can start building there, because the Minutemen are a faction of town builders, dedicated to building a loose alliance of independent holdings. So what do their missions look like? They look like solving the local issues of a town so they can stay independent.
But the way you go through the Minutemen missions themselves are still identical to the Brotherhood of Steel. You're still told to go to a place and kill everything within it or a specific NPC at times, and then you go back and you collect your reward. There's no variation. Maybe if you were told to go to these settlements and only build there, that would be a good argument, because the gameplay would be fundamentally different, but so far I'm not seeing much of a variance between a bunch of hulking, power armor wearing assholes telling you to kill a bunch of super mutants, and a bunch of dipshits in shanty shacks telling you to kill a bunch of super mutants.
The Brotherhood missions are largely violent,
as opposed to the Minutemen ones where you're supposed to peacefully shoot at the feral ghouls until they all die.
Fit elsewhere. 1. You can sprint now, which adds an extra element to AP management for VATS users and an extra reason to take agility even if you just want to shoot manually.
I agree. It's nice that you're faster able to traverse a map, especially when there's long distances between where you are now and where you need to go.
2. Quick looting. Oh, bloody hell, quick looting is amazing.
I agree, and I like that they had the foresight to organize what's listed based on what you're most likely to pick up. Get fucked. With quest items being on top, then caps, then medicines, ammunition, then weapons, armor, and miscellaneous junk at the bottom. Because they thought ahead about that stuff, and it actually shows, because it's a lot more convenient and easier to pick up loot than in any of the previous Fallout games. So good job. You've really made a good looter shooter. Maybe try to make an RPG next time, will ya?
4. Throwables are permanently set, meaning grenades etc. have been promoted from never used ever to really bloody useful.
I agree, and if they ever do remake New Vegas and keep the skill system, I don't think it would be in any conflict, because you do have the option of just throwing grenades and not shooting your gun. But I do like the fact that they do become far more usable to someone who doesn't specialize in explosives, or, you know, the sort of thing where you throw a grenade and then you're left empty-handed and need to open your Pip-Boy, then wait for your character to grab his weapon, and then you can finally defend yourself again.
5. Radiation now directly reduces your health bar. That's a brilliant system and makes radiation feel much more real and dangerous than the abstract systems of 3 and New Vegas.
I would also agree. Radiation previously lowering your endurance kind of phases out after a while, because you sort of forget that you have a lower endurance due to the radiation. Whereas here, there's a constant reminder of it, and a very real way it's affecting gameplay. The more radiated you are, the less health you have. That's bad, so avoid radiation and try to pick and choose when you think it's best to take a rat away.
And most importantly of all, the Volt suits are sexy and skin tight again.
Feels like I'm wearing nothing at all. Nothing at all. Nothing at all.
Guys, many a true nerd just sexually objectified a virtual woman. Let's start a hashtag cancel many a true nerd, because we do not accept this vile, misogynistic, Gamergate incel shit on our Fallout 4 videos. He must be stopped, he must be punished, because my goodness, I was just so fucking triggered there. I think I need like 20 cc's of The Last of Us 2 just to cope with this.
Now, of course, there are other things that we could discuss. There's the Institute and the way they're dealt with. We could just pass over that. The speech, we haven't talked about speech, and the game's intro is there are some interesting choices dotted about the map, by the way, that suggest all sorts of unfortunate. But I can't go into everything that doesn't work entirely properly in Fallout 4, and then how I evaluate the game overall when we factor all those things in together, because that would be ridiculous, and it would take a whole other video essay just to... Oh no.
And that's the end of it. I find it funny that he mentioned speech there, because that's one of the chief complaints from people who bitch about Fallout 4 being a bad RPG. And the entire reason those changes were made were largely because they removed the skills in favor of perks, and anything speech related being relegated to your special stats. But when that video comes out, if it's a good video, I might not respond to it, but if it's not, well, who doesn't want to see somebody complain about Fallout 4 over some video clips of TF2? At the start of his video, he pointed out there were two camps complaining about Fallout 3. There were the FPS players who came into Fallout 3 from stuff like Call of Duty and thought the shooting was piss poor. And there were the original Fallout fans who came in from an actual RPG and thought the RPG mechanics were piss poor. When defending the shooting aspect of Fallout 4 and the combat, he does pretty well. The combat is in fact a lot better than Fallout 3 and even New Vegas. That's something they focused heavily on, and I don't think there's any FPS fans who are complaining about Fallout 4 as a shooter, a looter shooter, or anything like that. But when he tries to defend Fallout 4 as an RPG, it just breaks apart, because the decisions Fallout 4 made in dumbing down the mechanics and stripping away your agency, you're no longer able to specialize and thus roleplay as a particular character. The story is nonsensical. You have no impact on the dialogue other than your charisma, meaning there's no difference between an intelligent character and a stupid one, or a well-informed character or an ignorant one. And the sort of ways you can complete missions in Fallout 4 are go to place, shoot thing, congratulations, you completed the mission. Maybe you also have to go back and tell the quest giver you shot the thing, but there's no way to handle things peacefully or diplomatically or sneakily or anything like that. It all ends up being a shooter, and that's all Fallout 4 really is. A shooter with some weak RPG elements attached to it. And it is fucking abysmal. So no, Fallout 4 isn't better than I think, and I don't think it's better than you think either. In fact, it might even be worse than we could have imagined. I hope you enjoyed the video, that gave you something to think about, and otherwise entertained you. Take care.